Today I have Sven Johnson's vintage Whitehead West Bend powered hot saw that he built many years ago. And we also have Sven Johnson here is not only my dad, but he's the guy that taught me how to fix chainsaws from the time I was a little kid hanging out in his saw shop. He also built a lot of racing engines for me over the years, McCulloch's, West Bends, and many others. And he was my coach and my mentor in not only the power sawing, but lumberjack sports.
I'm Sven Johnson. I traveled around the U.S., Canada, and Australia competing in lumberjack contests for 31 years. One of the events in our lumberjack contest is called a hot saw event. This is what we call a hot saw. It actually started out as an ordinary chainsaw, but we souped it up just like a racing saw or a cart engine or a motorcycle for racing. We did a lot of work on the inside of the engine, modified the ports, intake and out, and exhaust so that we could get more fuel in and out, and then added 3 carburetors, 2 here on the top, another one on the bottom, and an exhaust system, which is what we call the tuned exhaust system, or an expansion chamber. This also increased the horsepower. This is an actual disc from the Lumberjack World Championships. It's a 20-inch diameter white pine disc, which was actually cut off in the power saw race. There we had to make 3 cuts on a 20-inch diameter log. We had to start the saw, make a down, up, down cut, up cut, down cut, all within 6 inches of wood. So it required a bit of accuracy and quickness. So the big 3 items in the hot saw racing was to have a real good motor, a very good chain for the species of wood, and also a good operator because he has to be fast and very accurate. This picture was taken at Lumberjack World Championships at Hayward, Wisconsin. It was filmed by ABC Whitehead Sports. So this is the actual saw in that picture. Yeah, that picture is actually out of a book named The First 25 Years of Wide World of Sports. You might see here that I have won 10 times at Lumberjack World Championships at Hayward, Wisconsin. I still have the most wins at Hayward. The hot saw was one of my favorite events. I also liked 2-man sawing and underhand chopping. I spent a lot of time working on hot saws, so it took up most of my time. By the way, this saw was restored by my son, Sven Johnson. Took it all completely apart and repainted and restored it, put it in its original condition. About 1961, I started out part-time in the chainsaw business at my house. In the winter of 63 and 64, I built this hot saw that we see here. That was an actual chainsaw, an actual Whitehead brand chainsaw to start with, which we sold. Yeah, I was a chainsaw dealer at my house, which the decal says Voluntown, Connecticut, which was the mailing address at the time, but really is in the town of Griswold. So it started out selling McCulloch, and then added Homelight, and then the Whitehead brand. And down the years, we went through 13 brands. I was in the chainsaw business for 40 years. The Whiteheads were a tough sell because they didn't have a lot of advertising. They had a bigger motor than the McCulloch, and they were lighter than the McCulloch, and they were $100 less, and they still were hard to sell. We liked them for racing because they had an 820 West Bend motor in them. The kart racers were using for kart racing, so we adapted it to our hot saw racing. Worked really well. The Whiteheads were made in Georgia. They were popular in the South with bull bars instead of the straight bars for cutting pulpwood. Bull bars weren't used that much up here. A lot of them were shipped to Australia. That was one big market for them. A lot of the loggers on the west coast of the U.S. used Whiteheads because they had a big motor and they could run long bars on them, but not so popular out east.
McCulloch was always kind of ahead of a lot of the other ones and always coming out with new models. And
they were the first to sell 1 million saws. They were the first to sell 2 million chainsaws. They were the first to sell 3 million chainsaws. That's how popular they were.
I'm looking at your disc there, the 1967 when you won. I have a short clip of that day. That was in the days when you had the 3 carburetors, but you had the open header you talked about. Charlie Whitehead was with you that day. He was a young guy, so let's see if we can check out that clip. And I believe this is going to be the last day at Haywood. Haywood is a 4-day show, and you have to qualify, and this is getting down to the last day now. And there it is. Sven had just won the World Championship, 1967. There's Charlie working, Dave Gear congratulating him. All the other power sawyers. There's old boy Charlie Woykin having a brewski.
Yeah, I can see he's got a little PY in his hand there, and happy for Sven.
Yep.
I was the winner of the pulpwood cutting contest. It was quite a different hot saw contest, you might say. Actually, a chainsaw contest. There weren't all hot saws in it. They were in upstate New York, and they had 16-foot logs. You had to cut them into 4-foot sections and pile them in a rack. In that particular contest, I used a 173 McCullough. It was just a stock working saw. Most of the guys just had stock saws that they ran in those contests. But it was quite different than the saw races that we have now. When I started out in the lumberjack contest, I started here in the local fairs, and they only had 2 events. There were one-hand chopping and a 2-man cross-cutting. So that's the 2 events that we grew up competing in. As we've traveled further and went to bigger contests like the state championships, and I got involved in a lot more events. But power sawing wasn't in the ones that we started here. This one is another pulpwood cutting contest at Boonville, New York. Very similar. There were variations of these. Some you had to pile it in a rack. And some you were just timed at how long it took you to roll those 16-foot logs over, cut them in 4-foot sections, and remove them from the rack. So there were several different versions, which they don't do anymore. I had a lot of the competitors came from Canada. A lot of them used gear drive saws at the time, so the chain speed was very slow. It was a case of pulling the 16-foot log onto the rack, cutting them in 4-foot sections, and then pulling the 4-foot sections off the rack. Some of those contestants would use a gear drive saw. The chain turned slow enough so they could hook it into that 4-foot log and pull it backwards rather than doing it by hand. And they'd jump up in the air, and the log would fly out behind them. It went underneath them, so they jumped over the log. One of those contestants hooked his pants in that chain, and it tore off half of his pants. One half was gone. He kept right on going. He finished the contest. He was the star of that show. I doubt that I would have stopped either. This was at Old Ford's, New York. They had a lot of lumberjack contests in New York State. And it shows my original Whitehead with the hood and the 4 carburetors on it, which, as you can see, was a fairly bulky apparatus. This wasn't a pulpwood contest. It was just a straight chainsaw contest. I was lucky enough to win that. It was a Northeastern Logging Championship. That was 1965. This trophy was from a World Championship on the west coast of the U.S. It's in the state of Washington, where they used bigger wood. We had to cut a 45-inch diameter Douglas fir. We were only allowed to use a 30-inch bar, so we had to cut from both sides. We cut down through the one side, ran around, and finished on the other side. The trick was to make those 2 cuts match evenly without cutting any extra wood. My friend Mervyn Lentz, who was a timber faller on the West Coast, had a lot of experience cutting big timbers. So he gave me some pointers on how to approach this. I'd never cut one this big before. And in the contest, we tied, so we had to cut again. In the second run, I did manage to sneak by him for a first place. Yeah, the West Coast was noted for the big saws, big timber and big motors. A lot of Whiteheads and a lot of McCulloch chainsaws were there, and there were some really good operators also. Marvin, I was classed as one of the best out there, and without his tips, I probably wouldn't have managed to sneak that win up. I didn't have any experience for this wood, so how to file my chain. So he took a look at it and said, "Oh, you ruined it." But it seemed to work okay. My depth gauges were down a lot lower than Mervyn would have liked. Apparently it was okay because the saw had tons of power. So I built them for torque instead of RPMs. Yeah, that was a real good day for me. I won the hot sawing with a Whitehead saw. If you look at that picture, you'll notice that it doesn't have this big expansion chamber on the saw at that point. We just used regular mufflers in the beginning. Eventually we evolved. We used the expansion chambers to give it even more horsepower. Yeah, with the open exhaust system, if the carburetor happened to leak just a little bit, and you got a little bit of fuel out there in the exhaust, when you went to start the saw, it would catch fire. There'd be flame shooters out of that.
Well, going back to 71, that was the first year I went to Hayward, and you had built me a McCulloch. Here I am, 15 years old, running a hot saw in there with you and Merv Lenson.
Yeah, that was the beginning of your World Championship activity. I had a McCulloch saw for you to run because it was a lot lighter than a Whitehead racing saw that I had. But so I quickly had to make you a Whitehead also. We weren't satisfied with the McCulloch. They were all fun. They were a lot of fun to work on and experiment and trying new ideas.
On these here, Dad, you got 3 carburetors, which we had for most of the time. There were sometimes where we had 1 carburetor on top when they limited it. The contests only let us run 1 carburetor, but tell us about the very first one you built.
The very first one I built had 4 carburetors. It had 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom. It had a big hood over them to keep the sawdust out, so it was kind of a bulky thing. And you ran that for a little while, and then we found these carburetors which were a little bit bigger, so we went with 3, and it seemed to be a good, stable machine then, so kind of stuck with that.
Yeah, I remember that. As a little kid, you had those 4 carburetors on there, and then you had the big hood over the thing too that kept it covered.
Kept the sawdust out and kept everybody from seeing what I had.
Yeah. Then you had the open header too. Sometimes, like I say, the fire so it would come out of the open header, and it was kind of cool because right out in this area is where we used to not only try your saws and practice chopping, try a customer's saw. Sometimes it'd be, it seemed like the middle of the night. We want to go out and try your saw, and the next day, people across the river you run into, I say, "I hear your dad had his saw running last night." That thing would be barking all the way to Pacho and
They were loud.
That was pretty funny. Why did you like you stuck with 1 on the bottom? Why did you like the 3rd?
I liked the 3rd one because it sprayed fuel directly onto the connecting rods. The connecting rods were the weak part of these engines, and that's usually what would fail after a while. Bolts would stress out and break. Connecting rod would let go and smash the whole engine. One on the bottom sprayed fuel directly onto that connecting rod. I always had in my mind that helped keep them together.
One competitor always used to comment on your carburetor. He kind of thought your 3rd carburetor on the bottom was kind of a waste of time. He always called it an ornament. He said it's an ornament. You don't need that thing on there. But you went home with a lot of dough and a lot of trophies with that ornament. I know that.
That worked for me.
Yeah, that's it. You had good luck with it anyway.
Definitely.
That was kind of your trademark, the 3 carburetors. Amoco gas and McCulloch oil.
Just
It worked good for us. It worked good for us.
Yeah, Alex Bildu was from Isabella, Minnesota. Probably the best chainsaw operator I ever knew. A really good friend. The Lumberjack Championships were a 3-day event. There were eliminations each day. On Saturday, he was looking around, hoping he had another sprocket to put on his saw. So I went through my things and found a sprocket he could use, lent it to him. And because of that bigger sprocket, he got a little bit of more chain speed out of his saw, and he slipped by me in the finals. A very good friend. Also that year, my friend Ron Mann from Australia sawed with me there, and we won the 2-man sawing. Ron Mann was another expert at making hand saws, particularly for the Australian hardwoods. We finally had a chance to saw together here and won that world championship. I also ended up winning the all-around trophy, which is an accumulation of points over a 3-day period. So 72 was a real good year for me.
Years later, at your birthday party at 60th, I believe, Alex came out, and I think he gave you a birthday present, if I remember right.
He drove out from Minnesota 1,400 miles for my birthday party. And at the party, he gave me back my sprocket. Yeah, he was a real good friend. These 2 hand-carved wooden trophies came from St. Vianney, Quebec, Canada, 1977, both for the hot saw event. Saturday they had the North American Championship, and on Sunday they had the International Championship. There were contestants there from France and Belgium and Australia and New Zealand. Ron and I teamed up to win the 2-man sawing event there, and I also won the underhand chopping event. In the international event, I won the all-around championship, which is an accumulation of points in the overall events.
St. Vianney's is where we first met J.P. Mercier and his dad, right?
J.P. is a master craftsman in making the hand saws for the competitors all over the world. He's also a really good competitor himself in the sawing events. We didn't stand a chance in the bow sawing event as Jill Levesque was there.
Well, when I think when he went to Quebec, I don't know, we didn't have too much of a chance in the bow sawing anyway.
That was one event that I could have left my equipment home.
At the sound of the gun, they must reach down, start their machine, raise the machine, cut once down, once back up, and a 3rd time back through. Sven Johnson from Jewett City, Connecticut, has a son by the name of Ron. Ron is qualified already for the Tournament of Kings that will be held down in Charlotte, North Carolina. Sven Johnson is a 15-time world champion himself. He's a power equipment dealer, and he talked about these very powerful chainsaws. Any special fuel mixture you'll use?
Well, we're not in these, but some of the machines you'll see out here today will be running alcohol and nitromethane. These particular saws that Ron and I have are just running regular gas.
Now, your son was the one that topped in the elimination round. Did you expect that?
Well, actually, I expected I would, but it worked out the other way around.
Okay, the leader in this tournament in the elimination round was one Ron Johnson with 5.1. He's been in the business sawing these things for about 10 years. He works with his father, Sven Johnson, who we were talking to a little bit ago, in Jewett City, Connecticut. Ron is only 23 years old, but he has 5 world championships. Now, you'll be seeing in just a moment as they start these machines up, and let them warm up just a little bit.
So I'm looking at your disc there, Dad, 1979. You and I saw it off in the finals on ABC Wide Roller Sports. We got down to the last 2.
Spanning the globe to bring you the constant variety of sport, the thrill of victory, and the agony of defeat.
We both had your Whiteheads and West Bend engines that you built. You modified them. It was a good day for the Johnson racing team.
That definitely was a good day.
One weekend in each year, the work turns to sport, as lumberjacks and log rollers come from around the world to Hayward, Wisconsin, to compete against each other in events that demonstrate all the skills of the woodsman's trade: climbing, log rolling, sawing, and chopping. Throughout the summer, there are contests like this all over North America, but this is the big one, the World Lumberjack Championships from Hayward, Wisconsin, today on ABC's Wide World of Sports. This place is Hayward, Wisconsin, home of an outdoor arena where the woodsman is king, an arena called the Lumberjack Bowl. Now we're getting ready for the championship match in the power sawing competition. Defending champion Ron Johnson of Jewett City, Connecticut, showed Bob Beatty the difference between a regular garden variety power saw and the souped-up go-kart engine-powered model that he uses.
Well, this is a racing saw. We race these saws just like you would a motorcycle or a racing car.
So it's sort of souped up?
Yes. This particular one has a tuned exhaust system on it that gives it more power, also more RPMs. It also has 3 carburetors, 1, 2, and a third carburetor on the bottom. We put quite a few hours into the chain, do a lot of filing on the teeth, making more room for sawdust.
And there is Sven Johnson, Ron's father, and his opponent in this championship match. Sven is warming up his saw. Each man is given a chance to warm the saw up for 30 seconds before they start the event. Ron Johnson, incidentally, co-holder, along with Dave Gear of Lisbon, Connecticut, of the world record in this event, 11.36 seconds. They set that record in a dead heat semifinal match a year ago.
And Jim, those pegs that they had in their mouths during the warm-up have now been thrust into the throttle, so they'll start at full speed.
Once down, once back up, and back down.
And those 3 cuts have to be made within 6 inches of the end of the log, which requires a lot of skill.
Sven Johnson on the left is the winner. His block of wood hits the dock first, and Sven Johnson, for a 5th time, has won this event. So father defeats son, the time 12 and 26/100ths of a second.
Sven, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
You had some trouble with that saw, but it was okay, I guess.
Yeah, we had a little trouble in the first race. I switched the plug, but it runs running okay this time.
Ron, you did a pretty good. The old man's tough, isn't he?
Yeah, he's very good.
He's a little bit easier to get along with now?
Yeah.
Nice going to both of you.
Thank you.
They had eliminations over a 3-day period, down to the 2 finalists, which was my son Ron and me. We were running the saws that I had built. I was fortunate enough to sneak by Ron all that time, but he beat me many other times at the World Championships. He won several World Championships himself. When I first went to the championships, they only made 1 cut and the saw was running. But after a few years, they changed it so that a little bit of accuracy and a little bit of things involved. You really needed a good saw motor. You needed a good chain for that species of wood. You had to be a good operator because you had to be quick and accurate. You had to start the saw. Your machine had to start on the first pull or you pretty much were out of it. You had to make the 3 cuts within a 6-inch area on a log. If you didn't have a complete disc or if you cut the line, the 6-inch line, you were disqualified. So the key was consistency, to always make good cuts, not cut out, don't cut the line.
I remember one year they were kind of running short of wood, the 20-inch wood, and they were talking of possibly changing the rules. So they changed the rules so you have less than 6 inches. Make 3 cuts at less than 6 inches.
Yeah, we only had 5.5 inches of wood that year. You had to be real careful. If you made them a little thin, the disc would fly apart. You needed complete discs, and you needed not to cut that line or you were out. So the key was consistency every day to make clean cuts.
It's a lot of good memories. Wish we could turn back time.
They were fun days. It was fun traveling with you and competing everywhere all over the country. Ron actually restored this for me. Took it all apart, cleaned everything, and repainted so it looks like it did originally. Actually, it looks much cleaner now than when I ran it because it was always covered with sawdust and oil. So a lot of work went into the engines. They started out with just an ordinary chainsaw, but you did a lot of work to the intake and exhaust ports to get more fuel thrown in the stroke crankshaft to increase the displacement. We added 3 carburetors. We ended up with a saw that probably had 3 times as much horsepower as it did in the beginning. Strictly a racing machine.
1979, Dad and I sawed off in the finals at the Lumberjack World Championships in Hayward, Wisconsin. It was on ABC, Wide World of Sports. It was a good day for the Johnson racing team. 2 of Sven's Whitehead chainsaws with West Bend engines he built.
I also won several world championships sawing with Ron and a 2-man sawing also. It was always a fun time traveling together.
And thank you everybody for watching. Have a good day.
There's my sister right there on the right. This is Legend Fair. We'll put on an exhibition. Hot saw against the stock saw.
And he's doing some carving.
In the background you see Dewey Catlow and Joyce.